Top 10 Whitest States in the US, where many Black Americans say they don't feel welcome. You can live in America for years and still feel like you walked into the wrong room. Not because anyone said anything, not because of signs or slurs, but because every head turns at once, and then quickly turns away. That quiet moment? That's what this video is about. Welcome to Mr. Globe TV, where we don't just look at the map, we talk about what it feels like to live on it. America loves to describe itself as diverse, but the numbers tell a more uneven story. In some places, diversity drops so low that standing out becomes unavoidable. Census data confirms it. Migration patterns reflect it. And countless Black Americans describe the same experience using different words. Isolated, visible, tolerated, but not quite included. This isn't about angry accusations or dramatic headlines. Most of the time, nothing bad happens. People are polite, smiles are exchanged. Life goes on. And yet, something still feels off. Like being the only person clapping slightly off beat in a quiet room. No one tells you to leave. You just never fully feel like you arrived. And here's where input bias comes in. If you've never experienced this, it's easy to assume it's exaggerated. If you have, you probably don't need convincing at all. In this video, we're unpacking the data, the demographics, and the lived realities that shape these experiences. Without naming names up front, without rage, and without pretending numbers don't affect people. Stick around to the end, because the final entry challenges what many people think they know. If you're ready for honest, data-driven conversations about life in America, hit the like button. Subscribe to Mr. Globe TV, and let's get into it. Number 10. South Dakota. South Dakota takes the number 10 spot not because it feels openly unwelcoming, but because it can feel quietly empty in ways people don't anticipate. On the surface, it's calm, affordable, and refreshingly low drama. Life moves slowly. People wave, neighbors are polite, everything seems fine, at least at first. But that calm comes with overwhelming whiteness, especially in small towns where visibility is unavoidable. Many Black residents describe the same pattern. You're noticed immediately and everywhere. At the grocery store, at school events, at the diner where everyone already knows everyone else. It's not hostile attention, more like constant awareness. You're not being chased out of the room, you're just never able to blend into it. Outside of Sioux Falls, Black social spaces are limited. Cultural hubs, Black-owned businesses, and informal gathering spots are few and far between. That means community doesn't form naturally. You have to work for it. And while people are friendly, friendliness often stops at politeness. Conversations stay light, relationships stay surface level. Invitations don't always follow introductions. What makes South Dakota especially tricky is how manageable it feels in the beginning. The quiet can feel peaceful. The simplicity can feel grounding. But over time, the isolation sneaks up on you. You realize you're always adapting, explaining yourself, standing out, being the only one, without anyone ever telling you that you don't belong. And that's the paradox. South Dakota rarely feels aggressive or openly exclusionary. Instead, it feels like living on the edge of a conversation you were never fully invited into. For many Black Americans, the takeaway isn't fear or anger. It's something more subtle and harder to articulate. It doesn't feel hostile. It just feels lonely. And sometimes that's harder to navigate than outright rejection. Number 9. North Dakota. North Dakota lands at number 9 for a reason that surprises many people. Diversity exists here, but it often comes with an expiration date. Much of the state's racial diversity is tied to oil fields, energy projects, and short-term contracts. People arrive to work, not necessarily to settle, and that shapes how communities see newcomers, especially Black residents. Many Black Americans who've lived in North Dakota describe a subtle but consistent feeling of being treated as temporary. Not unwelcome, just assumed to be passing through. Conversations often start with, "So what brought you here?" and quietly end with the expectation that you won't be around long enough to matter socially. When a place is used to people coming and going, it doesn't always invest emotionally in those who arrive. Community ties here are deep, but they're also closed-loop. Friendships often trace back to childhood, high school, or family connections that stretch back generations. If you weren't already part of that story, breaking in can feel like showing up to a potluck where everyone coordinated dishes years ago, and you didn't get the group text. Then there's the cold. North Dakota's long winters don't just freeze roads, they freeze social life too. People stay indoors, keep routines tight, and circle inward. When social interaction is already limited, being different stands out even more. Isolation becomes both physical and social, especially for those without an established community. Add to that the scarcity of Black-owned businesses, cultural spaces, or informal gathering points, and the sense of rootlessness grows. Without anchors, it's harder to build belonging. You can live your life comfortably, work hard, and be treated politely, but still feel like you're living out of a suitcase, even after years. That's why North Dakota fits this spot on the list. For many Black residents, the message isn't rejection. It's quieter than that. You're welcome, just not expected to stay. And over time, that assumption can weigh heavier than the cold itself. Number 8. Kentucky. Kentucky earns its place at number 8 because it complicates the story. On paper, it's less white than many states on this list. The numbers suggest more diversity. The experience, however, often tells a different story. One shaped less by percentages and more by geography, history, and unspoken rules. The state's diversity is heavily concentrated in one place. Louisville carries much of Kentucky's Black population, cultural life, and economic opportunity. Step outside that metro bubble, and the landscape changes fast. Towns grow smaller, social circles tighter, and difference becomes more noticeable. For many Black residents living beyond the urban core, the shift feels immediate. You're no longer just another neighbor, you're the neighbor people quietly clock. What makes this challenging isn't open hostility, it's the quiet barriers. People are friendly, smiles come easily, small talk flows. But there's often a line that doesn't get crossed. Conversations don't deepen, invitations don't materialize. Trust feels conditional, like it has to be earned repeatedly, while others receive it by default. Kentucky's history also lingers in the background, rarely discussed but always present. Segregation may be officially over, yet its footprint still shapes neighborhoods, schools, and social networks. You can sense it in where people live, where they gather, and how communities form or don't. It's not loud or aggressive. It's more like an old song playing softly in another room. You're not focused on it, but it never fully goes away. That's why Kentucky stands out on this list. It reminds us that diversity statistics don't automatically translate into comfort or belonging. You can be surrounded by politeness and still feel carefully kept at arm's length. You can live somewhere for years and remain slightly outside the circle. For many Black Americans here, the realization comes slowly. More diversity on paper doesn't always mean more comfort in practice. And that gap between how a place looks statistically and how it feels socially is what makes Kentucky quietly complicated. Number 7. Wyoming. Wyoming ranks number 7 not because people are openly unkind, but because difference is impossible to hide here. It's one of the states with the smallest Black populations in the entire country, and that reality shapes everyday life in subtle but persistent ways. In many towns, being Black doesn't make you part of a minority, it makes you the exception. Hyper-visibility is the defining experience. Many Black residents describe being the only Black person in the room, and knowing it instantly. At the grocery store, at school meetings, at community events, it's not aggressive or confrontational. It's more like existing under a permanent spotlight. You're seen, remembered, and talked about, not because you did anything unusual, but because your presence itself is unusual. Wyoming's rural culture plays a big role here. The state deeply values self-reliance, independence, and minding your own business. That works well if you already fit in. But it also means there's little emphasis on actively integrating newcomers into social circles. Community bonds exist, but they're often quiet, closed, and long established. If you weren't part of them early on, breaking in can feel like knocking on a door that no one realizes you're standing behind. Curiosity often replaces hostility. People ask questions, sometimes lots of questions. Where you're from, how you ended up there, whether you like it. None of it is meant badly, but answering the same curiosity over and over can be exhausting. You're not having conversations, you're giving explanations. And that's the core challenge in Wyoming. It's hard to blend in when blending in isn't possible. You can live peacefully, enjoy the wide open spaces, and be treated politely while still feeling like you're constantly being observed from a polite distance. That's why Wyoming lands here on the list. For many Black Americans, the experience isn't exclusion in the traditional sense. No one tells you that you don't belong. You're not excluded. You're just always on display. And over time, that kind of visibility can feel heavier than outright rejection. Number 6. Iowa. Iowa's reputation walks into the room before it does. Friendly, polite, neighborly. The kind of place where people wave, hold doors, and ask how you're doing, sometimes twice. And yet, for many Black residents, there's a noticeable gap between how welcoming Iowa appears and how welcoming it actually feels. The issue here isn't open bias. It's passive distance. Interactions are pleasant, even warm, but they often stop right at the edge of something deeper. You'll get the smile, you'll get the small talk. You might even get a friendly chat in line at the store. What you often won't get is the follow-up. The call, the invite, the sense that you've crossed from neighbor into friend. A big reason is how social life in Iowa tends to work. Many social circles are formed early: childhood, school, church, family, friends, and then quietly sealed shut. These networks aren't hostile to newcomers, they're just complete. Breaking into them can feel like trying to merge onto a highway where everyone else has been driving together for decades, and no one's quite sure how to slow down. Black residents frequently describe the same pattern: welcomed politely, but not personally. People are nice, but relationships rarely deepen. It's the kind of environment where you're included in conversation, but excluded from connection. You're acknowledged without being absorbed. Over time, that gap starts to feel intentional, even when it isn't. What makes Iowa tricky is that the kindness is real. No one's pretending. But kindness without inclusion can still leave people feeling on the outside. It's like being offered a seat at the table, but never being passed the plate. You're present, but you're not quite part of the meal. That's why Iowa lands at number 6. It's not that people are unfriendly. It's that friendliness doesn't always turn into belonging. For many Black Americans, the takeaway is subtle but persistent. Nice doesn't always mean inclusive. And sometimes that quiet distance is harder to navigate than open disagreement, because there's nothing obvious to push back against, just something missing that never quite shows up. We're halfway through the countdown. If you've made it this far, thank you for staying with us. This isn't a light topic, and it's one that deserves patience and nuance. Every state so far shows a different side of the same reality: how demographics, culture, and history can quietly shape daily experience in ways statistics alone don't fully capture. And here's the thing: what we've covered so far is just the beginning. The remaining states on this list take these patterns even further, in ways that tend to surprise people who assume nice, progressive, or quiet automatically means inclusive. So before we continue, take a moment to like the video if this conversation feels thoughtful or informative. It helps this kind of content reach people who are actually looking for context, not outrage. If you're new here, subscribe to Mr. Globe TV for grounded, data-driven discussions about life, migration, and the realities behind the American map. And most importantly, share your perspective in the comments. Whether you've lived in one of these places, considered moving, or had a completely different experience, your insight adds depth to the conversation. Stay with us. The second half of this countdown gets more revealing, more uncomfortable, and far more telling. Number 5. Montana. This is where the list starts to feel heavier, and not because Montana is loud about anything. It's quiet here, expansive, beautiful in a way that makes you forget your phone exists. But that vast geography, paired with a tiny Black population, creates a kind of isolation that's hard to explain until you live it. In many counties, there are only a handful of Black families, sometimes none at all. Not neighborhoods, not blocks, families. That scale matters. It means representation isn't just low, it's practically invisible. You're not part of a community, you are the community, whether you asked for the job or not. Social life in Montana revolves around the outdoors: hiking, hunting, fishing, camping, activities that double as bonding rituals. If that's your thing, great. If it's not, the social menu shrinks fast. And even when you do show up, being the only Black face in a sea of flannel can feel less like inclusion and more like participation under observation. Many Black residents talk about the questions. Constant, repetitive, usually well-meaning questions. So where are you from? And then, when you answer the follow-up, No, where are you really from? It's curiosity, not cruelty, but curiosity on a loop becomes exhausting. You're not having conversations, you're providing backstory. What makes Montana particularly challenging is the contrast. The land is wide open. Freedom feels limitless. You can drive for hours without seeing another soul. And yet socially, belonging can feel incredibly narrow. Connections are few, circles are small, and once they're formed, they don't expand easily. That's why Montana lands at number 5. It offers space, peace, and independence, but community doesn't come as freely as the scenery. For many Black Americans, the experience isn't about danger or rejection, it's about distance. Emotional, social, and cultural distance that stretches just as far as the landscape. Freedom everywhere, except socially. And in a place built on wide horizons, that kind of narrowness can weigh more than people expect. Number 4. New Hampshire. New Hampshire earns the number 4 spot because it manages to feel welcoming and uncomfortable at the same time. A tricky combination that catches many people off guard. On the surface, it's highly educated, politically engaged, and proud of its thoughtful conversations about fairness, equity, and inclusion. The problem is that those conversations often outnumber the people they're supposedly about. New Hampshire is extremely white, and that homogeneity shapes daily life in quiet but persistent ways. Black residents frequently describe a strange contradiction, feeling invisible and hypervisible at the same time. Invisible in the sense that Black culture, history, and presence rarely show up in everyday life. Hypervisible because when you do show up, you stand out immediately. You're noticed, remembered, and sometimes spoken about more than spoken with. Diversity is often discussed here. At town halls, in classrooms, in policy language, but lived diversity is limited. It can feel like reading a well-written brochure about a place you never quite get to visit. The ideas are there. The practice is thinner. Acceptance, for many, feels intellectual rather than emotional. Supported in theory, untested in reality. The contrast becomes even sharper because of New Hampshire's proximity to Boston. Cross the state line and suddenly you're surrounded by visible diversity, layered cultures, and established Black communities. That closeness makes the absence back home harder to ignore. It's like stepping out of color and back into grayscale within a single commute. Socially, New Hampshire can feel quietly exclusive. People are polite, reserved, and often deeply rooted in long-standing circles. That reserve isn't aggressive, it's just firm. Breaking into social spaces can feel like trying to join a book club that's already finished the series and moved on without you. That's why New Hampshire ranks so high on this list. It genuinely welcomes the idea of diversity. It values it, talks about it, plans for it. But for many Black Americans, the lived experience still feels abstract, acknowledged without being fully embraced. Welcomes the idea of diversity, struggles with the reality. And in a place where intentions are good, but representation is thin, that gap can feel wider than anyone expects. Number 3. West Virginia. West Virginia lands at number 3 because this is where the emotional weight of the list really starts to show. It's one of the least diverse states in America, and that lack of diversity doesn't just shape demographics, it shapes conversations, priorities, and daily interactions in ways that can feel quietly overwhelming. In much of West Virginia, economic survival dominates the local focus. Jobs, wages, infrastructure, and opportunity sit at the center of almost every discussion. Race, by contrast, is rarely talked about, not because it's irrelevant, but because it's often overshadowed. For Black residents, that silence can be isolating. When your experience doesn't fit into the dominant narrative of struggle, it can feel like there's no language for it at all. Many Black Americans here describe feeling like cultural outsiders. Not unwelcome in an aggressive sense, just different in a place where sameness is the glue. Music, food, humor, and social cues don't always translate easily. You may be accepted as a person, yet still feel disconnected from the rhythm of everyday life, like dancing to a song only you can hear. History also lingers beneath the surface. West Virginia's past includes patterns of exclusion that shaped who settled where. And those patterns still echo in present-day communities. Neighborhoods remain homogeneous, social circles stay familiar, and change arrives slowly, if at all. What makes this especially complicated is that community bonds here are genuinely strong. People look out for each other. Loyalty runs deep. Relationships last generations. But those bonds are also tightly woven, and breaking into them can feel nearly impossible if you weren't born into the fabric. It's not personal, it's structural. Still, the result feels the same. West Virginia isn't hostile. It's guarded. And for many Black residents, that distinction matters. But it doesn't erase the loneliness. You can be treated kindly and still feel like you're living just outside the circle of belonging. That's why this state sits so high on the list. It shows how exclusion doesn't always come from rejection. Sometimes it comes from closeness that's already complete. Tight-knit communities aren't always open-knit. And in West Virginia, that reality can weigh heavier than words ever could. Number 2. Maine. Maine earns the number 2 spot because it catches people off guard. On paper, it often ranks as the whitest state in the country. In conversation, though, it carries a progressive reputation, thoughtful, socially aware, and proudly forward-thinking. The disconnect between those two realities is where the discomfort begins. Many Black residents describe a familiar experience, being mistaken for a tourist, at coffee shops, grocery stores, even at work. So, how long are you visiting? Becomes a recurring question, even after you've lived there for years. It's rarely meant to offend, but it quietly sends a message. You're seen as temporary, out of place, or passing through someone else's world. Maine talks a lot about diversity. Panels are held, statements are made, yard signs appear on lawns. The conversation is loud and well-intentioned. The problem is that diversity itself remains scarce. When there are so few Black residents, representation doesn't just feel thin, it feels symbolic. You're not joining a community, you're becoming a talking point within it. That scarcity creates another common feeling, being studied rather than included. Many Black newcomers say they're watched with curiosity, treated as interesting, even welcomed verbally, but rarely absorbed socially. You're invited into discussions about race more often than you're invited into people's lives. It can feel like living in a place where everyone supports diversity in theory, but no one quite knows how to practice it day to day. The contrast becomes more pronounced because Maine genuinely believes in its values. That belief makes criticism uncomfortable. When lived experience doesn't match intention, it's easier to assume the experience is exaggerated than to question the environment itself. And that's why Maine sits so high on this list. It isn't openly hostile. It isn't aggressively exclusionary. Instead, it creates a quiet form of isolation, one rooted in numbers, not necessarily attitudes. For many Black Americans, the takeaway is simple but unsettling. Progressive on paper, isolated in practice. And when expectations are high, that gap between image and reality can feel even wider than in places that never promised much to begin with. Number 1. Vermont. Vermont earns the top spot not because it's loud about exclusion, but because difference here is impossible to forget. It has the highest share of white residents in the United States, and in a state with a small overall population, that homogeneity gets amplified everywhere. When numbers are that lopsided, even small differences feel enormous. Many Black residents describe the same experience using different words. Permanently noticeable, not stared at aggressively, not treated poorly, just always seen. At the farmer's market, at town meetings, at school events. In a place where everyone knows everyone, being different isn't something you grow out of. It's something that follows you politely but persistently. Vermont is widely admired for its values. Kindness matters here. Community matters. Fairness is taken seriously. And to be clear, most people mean well. The challenge is that strong values don't automatically create lived diversity. When representation is thin, even good intentions can't fully close the gap between welcome and belonging. The state's small size magnifies everything. In bigger, more diverse places, you can disappear into the crowd when you want to. In Vermont, there often is no crowd. That constant visibility can wear on people over time. You become familiar without ever becoming ordinary. Known, but never neutral. What makes this experience especially complex is that it doesn't feel like rejection. No one tells you that you don't belong. You're greeted warmly, treated kindly, included politely. And yet, many Black Americans say they still feel like the other. Not excluded, just perpetually distinct. It's like being invited into a cozy room where everyone already shares a history you'll never quite have. You're welcome to sit, Welcome to listen, welcome to participate, but you'll always feel the edges of difference brushing up against you. That's why Vermont lands at number 1. It captures the quietest, most elusive version of discomfort on this list. Not hostility, not aggression. Something subtler and harder to explain. It's not that you're unwelcome, it's that you're never unseen. And for many, living permanently on display, even among kind people, can be more exhausting than outright rejection. We've reached the end of our countdown. If you've stayed with us all the way to the end, thank you. This wasn't an easy countdown, and it wasn't meant to be. What these states share isn't open hostility or obvious exclusion, but something quieter and more complex. Extreme homogeneity, limited representation, and social systems that weren't built with difference in mind. Across this list, a clear pattern emerged. In places with very small Black populations, everyday life can feel subtly harder, not because of what's said, but because of what's missing. Community spaces, cultural familiarity, the ability to blend in, disappear, and just be. Again and again, the experience many Black Americans describe isn't rejection. It's isolation, visibility, and the slow weight of always standing out. That doesn't mean these states are bad places or that people there lack kindness. Many are peaceful, beautiful, and full of well-meaning communities. But good intentions don't always translate into belonging, and numbers really do matter when it comes to lived experience. If this video gave you new perspective or challenged assumptions you didn't even realize you had, hit the like button. It helps thoughtful conversations like this reach beyond the usual noise. Subscribe to Mr. Globe TV for more data-driven insights into life, migration, and the realities behind the American map. And now, it's your turn. Share your experience in the comments, whether it aligns with what we discussed or tells a different story entirely. Respectful conversations are how understanding actually grows. Until next time, stay curious and keep looking beyond the surface.